Welcome. Today's webinar is Charities Lean Forward Fundraising and Digital Protection. This Charities Lean Forward series is a joint collaboration with the Office of the Commissioner of Charities and Bono SG. My name is Serene, and I'll be your moderator for this session. Before we begin, here are some housekeeping matters to take care of. Please note that today's discussion is not meant to substitute any form of professional legal advice. If you require specific legal advice, please consult a lawyer. For today's program, we will first have an opening address by the Commissioner of Charities, Mr. Desmond Chin. This will be followed by a sharing by Mr. Samuel Yen on legal considerations when fundraising, and Mr. Hoi Wai Khin on digital protection. We will then walk through a case scenario that charities may encounter, and finally, we'll end off with a Q&A session. We would now like to invite Mr. Desmond Chin, Commissioner of Charities, to give his opening address.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It's my pleasure to be here, and I'd like to express my deepest appreciation to our partner, Bono SG, for co-organizing this seminar with us. And Serene, of course, for helping to moderate it, as she has been doing so the last several times as well. Now, I also like to thank our distinguished speakers who will be sitting on the panel later, Samuel, Wai Khin, and Aarthi, who will be sharing later. Now, charities obviously need funds to operate. And one key source of fundraising, of income, is really through fundraising, apart from obtaining fees, programs, grants, and so on and so forth. Now, some years back, charities had relied largely on street fundraising as it offered a human touch to the approach. Now, charities were also less digitally savvy at that point in time. But as you and I know, that with COVID-19 pandemic, everything changed. For the last 3 years, we had shutdowns, we couldn't do fundraising in the normal way. So out of desperate necessity, all the charities had to embrace digital fundraising, and as that was the only way that we could reach out to donors because of our tough social distancing measures that were in place for the safety of people. Now, crowdfunding platforms had also become much more popular during this period of time. In fact, many charities realized that digital fundraising would now provide a much more sustainable and alternate means to physical fundraising alone. And indeed, we have seen that this is now a rising trend. And we have also noticed that today, we now have 5 crowdfunding platforms that have subscribed to the Code of Practice for online charitable fundraising appeals. These are Give.Asia, Giving.SG, Ray of Hope, Simply Giving, and DIDA. If you'd like to find out more about them, please go to the charity portal. You'll find the details there. Some charities have also now realized that they need to diversify the way in which they fundraise. And they've now adopted 3 different forms, I've noticed, of the fundraising in the long run. They could do it virtually, they could do it physically, and for some, they've chosen a hybrid model, instead of just relying on a physical form alone or a virtual form alone. This act of diversification will now allow charities to raise more money and to mitigate the risk associated with just having a single source of income, and to improve their long-term financial sustainability. I think it is a smart thing to do. However, before all charities rush into any of these single form of fundraising mode, I think it is important that the recap on the do's and don'ts of fundraising is shared. And I'd like to thank Samuel in advance, because he will be covering this aspect of fundraising in his presentation today. There will also be some changes that are upcoming to the revised regime for charitable fundraising appeals, which I would like to briefly touch on now. With a maturing charity landscape, we would like to make it easier for our registered and exempt charities to raise funds through house-to-house and street campaigns, while making it safer for our donors at the same time. So currently, as you and I know, fundraisers who are collecting donations through visits from house to house or by soliciting in the streets require a license from the police or a fundraising permit from the National Council of Social Services, or NCSS. At the same time, the COC also regulates these charitable collections. under the revised regime that's coming, these collections for registered and exempt charities that are under the Charity Act and foreign charitable purposes that are approved by the COC will be registered under the Charities Act only. So in lieu of licensing, an enhanced disclosure program will be implemented for public fundraising appeals for charities and FRFCP permit holders. While there is now no need for these charities to obtain a license from the police or NCSS, they will, however, need to disclose full details of the fundraising campaigns on the charity portal before they commence such public appeals. These details will include the purpose of their fundraising, the duration of their fundraising, the fundraising activities per se, as well as the method of appeal. So we would like charities now, if they want to do such forms of fundraising, to make it transparent and to provide these details in the charity portal so that the donors can access it. So from henceforth, when it comes into effect, the donors can verify the legitimacy of the collections by searching the name of charities to view the details of the fundraising activities as has been disclosed by the charity on the charity portal. This will safeguard the public interest and trust so the public can continue to support charitable causes with confidence. The new regime will be implemented later this year, and we are working out the details and we'll share it by the middle of the year or so. Now, I've spoken earlier on about the various forms of fundraising. While street fundraising has resumed, charities, I feel, should not give up on their digital fundraising. However, there are areas that the charities must be mindful of, because with digitalization, this also means that there are now new and growing risks such as cyber attacks, data breaches, spread of misinformation, and scams. Charities must therefore step up their cybersecurity measures to protect both their organizations and their donors from scammers, fraudsters, and cheats. Wai Khin from RSM will kindly be sharing examples of cybersecurity and data breach incidents, and also sharing key lessons from them and the common mistakes that we always make and cyber hygiene best practices that we should observe. He will also share some practical tips on how to improve our charity's internal controls, such as in relation to QR codes being used during street fundraising appeals. Now, Aarthi will also share how SPCA has leveraged on crowdfunding platforms to encourage donations and to share about SPCA's mission. She will also be telling us on some of the challenges that SPCA faces in their digital transformation journey and how they have dealt with it. Now, the Office of the Commissioner of Charity, along with the Charity Council and various partners, will continue to support charities in your digitalization journey. I'd like to share two particular grants that charities can tap on, and you should tap on because the funds and the grants are available. First, charities can tap on the CCF, which includes a training grant that subsidizes our board members and key staff who wish to attend training on digitalization, data protection, and cybersecurity. So please apply for it. If you are planning to engage a consultant to review your charity's fundraising policies, you can then tap on the consultancy grant as well. If you're interested in these, please go to the charity portal. We will give you the link, the funding details, and how you can apply for it will be there. Well, it's very nice to see all of you again, and I'd like to wish you all a very fruitful time this afternoon. We have lined up, Pro Bono SG has lined up an excellent array of speakers and panelists, and they will be sharing their views and thoughts on these areas. So please ask all the questions you want, and I'd like to wish you again a very good afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner of Charities. Our next speaker is Mr. Samuel Yuen. Samuel is the Managing Director of Yuen Law LLC, an award-winning Singapore law practice specializing in legal issues relating to startups and emerging companies. He is the head of its corporate practice group. Since starting his practice in 2001, Samuel has gained a reputation as a creative but pragmatic practitioner of the law who is able to provide effective legal solutions. Samuel serves as the Honorary Legal Counsel for the Institute of Public Relations of Singapore and founded the Guide Dogs Singapore Limited, a registered charity with IPC status. He is also a member of the Singapore of the School Advisory Committee of Tanjong Katong Secondary School. I would like to hand over the time to Samuel to share about legal considerations when fundraising.
Thank you, Serene. Good afternoon to you, Mr. Commissioner. It's very good to see you, and it's an honor to speak with you in the seminar, in this webinar as well. Now, if I may jump straight into this, I'm also given to understand that our audience today will comprise of quite a wide scope of charities, including new charities as well as those who are a bit more seasoned in the scene. So perhaps a starting point that is good for everybody will be to look at how the current fundraising regime is being set up. Now, if I may draw your attention to the main acts and of course the main regulations, you'll find that in Singapore we have the Charities Act 1994, and this is really the overarching piece of legislation that really sets out the regulations and the rules that are imposed on charities, and of course, which is governed by and regulated by the Commissioner of Charities. Now, you'll find that any fundraising appeals conducted in Singapore for charitable, benevolent, or philanthropic purposes are regulated under this Act. Now, you also find that another piece of very important legislation is the House to House and Street Collections Act. Yep. And under these acts, you have what we call subsidiary or rather regulations in this case, where we have, of course, fundraising appeals for local and foreign charitable purposes regulations. Okay, this under the Charities Act, which sets out the obligations of fundraisers and the requirements for fundraising, which includes, set of all things, amongst other things as well, clear and accurate information to donors about the beneficiary and the purpose, proper usage and records of donations received and dispersed. Now, if I may also continue. Now, when we are talking about charities and the issue of fundraising, there are some general duties that we should be mindful of. And these general duties pertain to how the funds are being used, or in this case, the usage of donations. Donations must be used for specified purposes, which are specified by the donor. There must be, where there are no intention that have been specified, donation must be used according to the purpose communicated to the donor before or at the time the donation is received. Yeah, you also find that there are, of course, the 30/70 fundraising expense rule, which stipulates the breakdown in how in the proportion of which the fundraising expenses cannot exceed, sorry, let me catch my breath. Okay, so under the 30/70 rule, okay, not more than 30% of the funds raised must be used for expenses. Yeah, and this is based off the total receipts from the fundraising and sponsorships as calculated per financial year. And you'll find that you have the 80/20 foreign charitable purpose rule, which essentially stipulates that not at least 80% of the funds collected must be used towards charitable purposes in Singapore. More importantly, we must be clear about the funds, the purpose of the funds when we are approaching our potential donors. Yeah, and it is also very important for charities to maintain accounting records, financial statements, and of course to subject them their organizations to proper audits. Yeah. It is very important to remember that the accounting records, right, should be maintained for at least 5 years from the end of the financial year to which the accounting entry relates to. Yeah, so minimum 5 years. Yeah. Further, you'll find that under Regulation 8, a charity must also disclose in its financial statements the total amount of donations received during the period for to which the financial statements relate to. So that's quite a lot to remember, but do bear in mind it is really about accountability and it is about transparency. Now let's move on to the kind of permits that the current regime requires us to abide and to follow. Yeah, so currently permits required for public fundraising appeals can generally be looked at as whether it is local or foreign. Now, public appeals by visiting house to house or soliciting in the streets or other places, right, of course, currently requires a license, the HHSC license from the police or from the NCSS. Now, if you are raising funds for foreign charitable purposes, regardless, okay, you must seek the permission from a permit from the COC office, and this is actually the fundraising for foreign charitable purposes, the FRFCP permit. Yeah, so this is in a nutshell what is currently required, and I'm sure that quite a lot of us are very familiar with these rules. Now, what is really exciting is since last May, we have had that public consultation. And I believe that the proposed disclosure regime, which has been discussed since then, has really gained quite a bit of traction with most charities. And as a legal practitioner, I see it as a very interesting and very important development. Yeah, we are, of course, moving now into a disclosure regime. And I think that this regime, whether it is implemented now or later, is going to change the way we fundraise. If we move on to the next slide, you'll find that the proposed disclosure regime currently do away with quite a fair bit of need for licensing and permits. So for example, house to house or soliciting in streets or other places formerly used to require of course, as I mentioned earlier, from a license from the Singapore Police Force or a permit from NCSS. Under the new proposed disclosure regime, you'll find that for house to house and soliciting in the streets or other places, no HHSC license or NCSS permit will be required. However, there is, of course, a disclosure requirement on which can be done simply on the charity portal. And the details of which I will go into later. But it suffices to say that so long as you disclose the details of the public appeal 7 days before the actual appeal, you are good to go. And of course, under the new proposed regime, collectors or fundraisers will need to carry clear identification when soliciting for donations. And you'll find that this clear identification also includes a letter, okay, which is done according to a prescribed format. The only things that remains the same under this new regime is really the fact that any foreign charitable purposes, for example, such as disaster relief for Turkey or Syria, you will still need to seek the same FRFCP permit from the COC's office before fundraising may commence. This is something which rightfully remains unchanged under the new disclosure, proposed new disclosure regime. Now, why are we doing it this way? So let us now look at the objectives of the proposed disclosure regime to have a better understanding. Now, one thing that is fantastic about this new regime from an administrator's point of view is that it eliminates dual regulation under the HHSC and the Charities Act. Under the new regime, there is no longer a need for license or permit, and you are able to reduce your administrative burden, especially for charities and fundraisers. Now, it is also something which I find very interesting because it gives charities, and this is me speaking from my previous experience with charities, to build trust and stronger relationships with your donors. The clear disclosure is certainly something which will help you engender that air of trust or the environment of trust with the people, with the stakeholders generally. Now, one thing that we have to understand about this new disclosure regime is that you must disclose on the charity portal using your COPPASS or your SingPass at least 7 working days before the start of the appeal. Yeah, so you will find that under the website, you will have to set out your purpose, duration, location, and of course the method of appeal as well, whether it is by street collection or by going from house to house. You will also have to indicate very clearly the name, contact number, email address of the charity that is conducting the appeal, and if relevant, the FRFCP permit holder. Yep. Moving on, you'll find that if you are using a third-party fundraiser to raise the to do the appeal, you have to identify the third-party fundraiser, the percentage of total gross receipts from the appeal that is expected as payment going to the TPF. You will also have to declare, if especially by the charity or the FRFCP permit holder, a written agreement has been established with the fundraiser as required under the existing regulations, and due diligence has been conducted on the TPF, and the TPF was found to be fit and proper for this activity. Now, something to say about due diligence, it is not just going to their website. Due diligence from a professional perspective requires you to dig a bit deeper into how they have conducted their affairs, maybe to ask around and to see if you have whether your fellow charities or people in the charity sector have heard about that particular fundraiser. In some cases, there could be cases or court cases involving the company that you wish to work with, and that is probably a red flag that you might want to investigate further. So moving on, under the disclosures, right, that will be published on the charity portal, you'll notice that once it is disclosed, it will almost be immediately available at the speed of electricity, I suppose, that for the public to view. Yeah, the public will be able to view the disclosures and verify these public appeals when they search for fundraising activities. And this is where the QR code issued by COC will be very instructive and useful. It will allow the potential donors to scan the QR code and to verify the identity of the fundraiser directly. Yeah, so now I want to draw your attention to the disclosure submission page on the charity portal. You see that we have circled the links that you may click on in order to enter the details. So it is very straightforward, something that is highly administrative, and it should not take too long given how advanced we are these days with the use of technology and websites in general. Now, moving on, let's examine the proposed identification requirements for the collector or fundraiser, right? As I mentioned earlier, the fundraiser should carry an official letter from the charity or the permit holder containing the following: official letterhead of the charity or permit holder, serial number of the letter. Now, this is very interesting. Why serial numbering? Serial numbering will therefore allow the charity who has issued the letters to track the actual fundraiser. So it is an added security feature, which Wai Khin will speak on more later. But I feel that serial numbering is something which will give more comfort to the person receiving the letter as well. So this is although it seems like a very small item on the letter, it is actually a very important security feature. Now, moving on, of course, the collections purpose, sorry, back to the earlier slide. Yeah, so you find that collection purpose, duration, location should be stated very clearly. Again, as an additional security feature, it allows for verification. Yeah, the QR code, which has been mentioned, will allow the potential donors to verify. And of course, the contact details, such as the contact number and email address of the charity or FRFCP permit holder, should be included as well. Now, if you are using TPF, third-party fundraisers, please identify the third-party fundraiser in the letter as well. And last but not least, the letter must be signed by the chairman, CEO, or executive director of the charity or the permit holder. Now, where a third-party fundraiser is involved, the signature of the CEO or equivalent designation of the third-party fundraiser should be included jointly. Next, please. All right, so I'm given to understand that the fundraising regulations may be amended in the near future. Okay, primarily to prescribe the proposed disclosure requirements and of course the identification requirements, and also to empower the commissioner to take appropriate regulatory and enforcement actions, such as imposing a penalty for any failure to comply with the requirements or for willfully providing inaccurate disclosures. Now, for someone like me who is practicing as a lawyer and also who is involved with charities, this is something that I certainly look forward to. And my hope is that we can have this regime implemented, as soon as possible. But of course, we must go through due process. Now, in the interim, before the legislative changes can kick in, do note that HHSC license, NCSS permits are still required for collections conducted through visits for house to house or by soliciting in the streets. Now, for island-wide appeals, please note, okay, such as for Flag Day, please note that anything that is conducted between now till the 30th of April 2023, you must still secure a date from NCSS before the commencement of the appeal. Yeah. So that's all I have to share for today. Back to you, Serene.
Thank you, Samuel. Before we invite our next speaker, we will watch a short video on the process of submitting a disclosure on the charity portal. Our second speaker is Mr. Hoi Wai Khin. Wai Khin is a partner with RSM and has more than 20 years of experience in the management of technology, cyber, information risk, and business continuity. His extensive local and overseas experience includes managing risk, audit, security programs to meet legal, human resources, audit, IT, risk management, and regulatory requirements. We will now invite Wai Khin to share about cyber hygiene essentials to secure your fundraising efforts.
Thanks, Serene. Before I actually start, just now that short video clip actually makes me think back when I was a kid. And every Saturday and Sunday, I will see people selling flags. And I will definitely have some coins, 10 cents, 20 cents in my pockets. And when I see someone coming over, I will put the 10 cents and 20 cents into the box. And of course, you'll see a lot of others seeking the same donation. And of course, I will proudly show my chest, that I actually have a sticker and show them that, hey, I've already donated. Nowadays, I don't really see much such flag selling. And I was actually thinking, where does my kids actually get such knowledge? And also in terms of donation to charities, to support the cause. And I realized that, nowadays youngsters, a lot of them actually go digital. They go onto the platform, they go onto the system, they use the phone, or sometimes, the president charity, they will just, donate via the phone number or even just to the apps. And as I've been in this industry for about 20 years, and I have actually seen the transition from the donation. And last time I didn't know that to just sell a flag, you need so much licensing. And with today's session, I have actually learned a lot. And also things doesn't change. Of course, Mr. Samuel has actually mentioned about changing in terms of the legislation. But the underlying, the collection, for the cost, I think the legislation things are actually the same. So good afternoon, Commissioner, Mr. Samuel, panelists, and Ms. Adil later that is going to join the panelists. It's a privilege for me to actually share about when we actually move from a physical collection of donation to a technology platform, what are some of the common issues that we have actually seen? So I did a quick search onto the internet. And of course, there's no shortage of such donation platform. And of course, I will always ask myself, what are the top 3 key risks that you can actually think of? And especially when on the platform itself, there's no more human interaction. All you're dealing with is a platform. And I keep asking myself, or even when I was actually auditing my client, and I said, what are the 3 things that you need to be concerned about? Of course, other than, I think Mr. Samuel has mentioned about scam, and also we need to be worried about the legislation itself. Online platform, there are more issues. For example, how do I be sure that the website is secure? And how do I ensure that the website that I'm donating is actually true? And of course, lastly, how do I ensure that the information that I put onto the website is actually secure? So moving on, if you can actually see, these are some of the things in which I always ask a lot of the organization. If you actually put your platform, your donation platform online, how do you ensure, the first question I've asked earlier, unauthorized people that cannot inject links, cannot make changes to your website, cannot redirect your website to other malicious sites? How do you ensure that your website is properly updated with the latest patch? And how do you ensure any changes to the website doesn't introduce new risks? And how do you ensure your website is maintained by a proper person? And again, most important thing, we have seen a lot of charities, they outsource the development, the hosting to a third party. And how do you ensure that the service provider is free and proper? So let us take a look at some of the things in which we can actually consider. First, we need to understand who is ultimately responsible for ensuring the security of the website. And what we have actually seen on the ground, most charities, when they outsource or when they develop such platform, they assume it's a cloud service provider. They have all the security control. They say that the platform is a responsibility of the service provider. I only use the services. They are supposed to give me all the assurance. And of course, the application level is depending on the ownership itself. Some of them, they'll push it again to the service provider. Some of them, they'll say that, it's actually the charity. So moving on, we have actually seen quite a lot of similar issues on the ground. When we actually start to audit the ground, the first question we ask, look, have you actually done a regular exercise? Have you done a regular assessment over your website to determine the role and responsibility, to determine where are the services, to determine whether are the security in place? And many of the time, a lot of the charities, they say, I'm not sure. I have not done even a simple things, a technical term stated VAPT, a vulnerability assessment penetration testing, is to mimic an attacker to attack on your website. And a lot of times, excuse me, a lot of time they will just say that, oh, the website is working. I have not seen any issues. It's actually secure. This is what the service provider has actually assured me. But again, from the assurance point of view, I told them that you cannot just base on the representation of the service provider. The responsibility ultimately is the charities. If you pull up this website, you are responsible to ensure the security of the website, to ensure the information are protected, to ensure the donation you collected is fit and proper. So moving on, we have also seen quite a lot of common issues on the ground. And some of the main key things that we have seen. A very classic example, I think you have seen a lot of such news. Have you even turned on the proper 2FA, a two-factor authentication on your website? When you actually access the website, do you just use a user ID and password? Do you regularly review who have access to your portal, who have access to your database? And of course, last but not least, do you know when was the last time you log in, or any of the administrators that log in, and what are the things that they have done? So these are some of the very common issues they have seen on the ground when I was actually auditing many of my charities when they actually put forth such website on the internet. And moving on, if you see, these are some of the very technical details in which my client actually told me, oh, Wai Khin, this is so complex. What is the CVE details? Well, what is 349? And what is the EXE code SQL? They don't understand, it's too detailed. And that's why I actually advise them, precisely is detailed. That's why you need to get a professional in, to go in, validate your website, to make sure that whatever being published are being covered. And if you look at here, it's actually some of the vulnerabilities being published on WordPress. And the WordPress is one of the common tools being used by a lot of platforms to do content publishing. So if you find it too technical, seek help. Now, if you move on, you look at some other consideration. This overview cyber threat is published by Cybersecurity Agency. And again, every year, definitely there's more than a few hundred websites that is being defaced. So deface might not be just putting a scowl on your website. I can easily redirect your website to another portal. I can easily change the information on the portal, or I can easily also replicate, the charities portal, mimic as a real website to seek donation. So all these statistics are real. I mean, even one case is one case too many. Now let's take a look at the next common issue that we have seen. QR code. So just now we mentioned about QR code. So can I actually invite all my audiences, can you actually help me click on this QR code? And can you please help me donate $10 to Wai Khin's cause? Because later I'm going to donate to SPCA. Yes, I think that's actually important. So again, for the QR code is just a mechanism for you to have a quick and easy way, instead of typing, to connect to the particular website. And many a times when I actually ask the charity, some of the charity, they have this page. They have this page actually put a QR code, scan to pay me now, scan to pay lah, or scan this QR code to pay. And my question to them is that as a charity, how do you ensure that your QR code is not being displayed, it's not being tampered with? And of course, on your website, have you actually provided any guidances, for the for those that donate, to ensure that they check, and these are the real website that they connect to, and these are the real bank accounts that they are paying for. So it doesn't take one hand to clap, it takes two hands to clap for things to happen. So making sure the QR code is secure, making sure the people donating is properly aware, and they have to do their due diligence before they click the button and pay now. Excuse me. Excuse me. Okay. So the next few slides, I'm going to share about, again, some of the common issues that I have seen on the ground. The second consideration and what we have actually seen on the ground is many charities are ill-prepared to handle any successful attack onto the platform. And when we actually went in and audit them, one of the first questions we asked, have you got a proper data breach management plan? Have you actually got a proper incident response plan? Let's take a look at some of the findings that I have actually provided during the course of my audit. They don't even have a proper policy in place. And they don't even have a process to ensure their detection in place. If there's any breach, what are the escalation process? What are the responding? How do they actually recover? So these are some of the most common recommendations that I have given to my client when they're actually on the platform, or they're actually using some kind of technology to collect the donation itself. So the next consideration I'd like to share is change. A lot of us knows that the contents on the website doesn't stay. It keep on changing because you need to put on regular contents, you need to put on updates, you need to put on information, for the donors to understand. And also maybe there might be a requirement to change bank account, okay, or a kind of a donation mechanism. So how do we ensure that when the service provider make a changes to the website, it doesn't introduce new vulnerabilities? And we have actually seen quite a lot. If you look at the issues that we have actually brought up in the recommendation, this is a very, very classic one-liner. If you look at the middle description, there is no proper change management process in place. And very straightforward, a lot of people ask me, Wai Khin, what does that involve? And my answer to them is very simple. If you make any change, make sure that you really understand what's the change, do a proper due diligence, understand what's the impact. After you make the change, make sure you validate. Don't leave everything to the service provider. Or if you have an in-house, don't leave everything to the IT, making sure that there are processes in place, a marker and a checker process. And there are more consideration. If you look at the next few consideration that I have actually noted on the ground, employee awareness is also another key issue. And I understand is that there are a lot of awareness out there, but has it been properly communicated down? And when we actually go down and check with the charities itself, if you look at the findings, it's a very, very classic findings about user not being properly aware. There's no regular training. And even PDPA, they actually mandate, especially for charities, they have done a lot of personal data collection. They need to do regular annual training. And on the ground, we are not seeing that. And again, this is one of the most common findings that we have seen. And even though they say that they have done the audit, they have done the training, they have done the awareness, and we question them how effective. Have they done the test? Have you make sure that they properly log what they have or who have attended, from when to what time, and what are the content that they have actually learned? It's useless just to go through the motion. Nowadays for training, we need to make sure that people are aware and they know what's going on. So moving on, there are many other things in which we have also seen. For example, good key controls. And these are some of the things we have actually seen. Most charities has some kind of security mechanism enabled. In technical terms, we call it the SSL. And I think that is good. The next one is most of the charities have also enabled a second factor authentication when logging into the platform. And we have actually, we are quite happy with this control. And again, most charities have proper backup in place. And the fourth one, we found that, yeah, very good. All charities have a data protection officer assigned to oversee all PDPA matters. Because when you're actually online, in one of the link at the bottom, you need to have this thing called the PDPA policy or privacy policy. And it's very hard to actually see most of the charities, they do actually have the link to a PDPA policy. However, not everything we see a good key controls are effective. Just now I mentioned that they do have good key controls. They do have backup in place. But however, we did not see there are proper tests being done. And when we actually went in, we asked them a question, what happens if your data is corrupted? How do you ensure the backup can be restored? a lot of the charities, they have a data protection officer. And when we actually ask them, are the DPO, the data protection officer, trained? A lot of the answer is no, because they are doing part-time. Some of them, they are being roped in. And some of them saying that, they are just being arrowed. We have seen a lot of such things on the ground. And we always told them, a DPO is not just being assignment, you need to be properly trained. And of course, the PDPA policy itself, they say they have a link, but the PDPA policy on the website does not really meet the requirement of the PDPA requirement. And of course, lastly, this is one of the most common thing or important thing that we have seen. Charities always, think that the cloud service provider provide all the security controls, which is false. So you can see there's a mixture of good security controls, but again, whether is it effective, there are other things that we need to consider. So moving on, if you look at some other challenges that we can actually see on the ground, especially facing the charities. I believe 99% of the charities will have the same sentiment. And when I actually spoke to 99% of my clients, they have the same issue. One of the most common issue is lack of skilled professional. They say that they cannot attract enough people, good enough people. Again, some of the IT personnel or skilled personnel is a part-time basis. Some of them, are here on a volunteer basis to actually help. And the second one is the budget issue. And again, charities, because they are using donors' money, and every dollar saved is every dollar. They can actually use every dollar for their internal purpose. So again, budget is one of the key things in which they always say we not enough budget, and they always need additional funding, and they might not have enough, to cover such technology risks. And of course, the last one, awareness. And until now, again, if we just run through a kind of survey, even on the ground, about the security awareness, the role and responsibility, I would say, 50% of them are still a bit focused more on the operational issues rather than security issues. So after understanding the top 3 challenges, there are some other things in which we can consider to do in order to beef up our internal control processes. So the first one, what we can actually do is to collaborate with reputable donation platform. And just now, our COC has actually mentioned, currently there are 5 platforms. I think instead of building your own platform, you can consider to collaborate with the 5 platforms being listed by the charities itself. And of course, next, we can also consider perform an internal control review. And there are some very good guidelines, in the market. For example, the Cybersecurity Agency came out with this Cybersecurity Essential. It's not very heavy, but it's a lightweight kind of a health check to make sure that the key controls are there. And of course, IMDA, they do have this data protection essential, in which we help the organization to kickstart some basic process in terms of data protection. Then the third, leverage on IT service provider, managed service provider. Of course, we need to make sure that we do a proper due diligence, making sure that the service provider that we actually got in are fit and proper. And we cannot again assume everything the service provider it will be able to provide, but rather we need to understand the capabilities, what are the scope of work, and how the service provider is able to help you to manage your internal IT. So these are just some of the quick takeaway, and I'm going to do some quick sharing on some of the others best practices that we can actually have. And 101 Essential is what we call a data protection best practice, DPE. It's initiated by IMDA in collaboration with PDBC. And just now I've actually mentioned, this is one of a very good standard that actually help organizations to kickstart some of your basic requirement to ensure that the internal controls are there. It's not so heavy. It's focused mainly on SMEs. Of course, we have seen a lot of charities that is a SME base, and this is one of the very good kind of a foundation security requirement that they can actually follow. So the next one is what we call the data protection best practices. And in the PDBC website itself, they have actually identified some common type of data breach through ICT, okay, through system. And they have also provided checklists and guidances. And these checklists and guidances are meant, to help you to prevent and guard against common type of data breach. For example, the checklist one is more about application security. When you develop a website, when you develop a platform, how do you ensure that the information, how do you ensure that the website is secure? So there are pointers out there, and charities can actually use this checklist and share it with the service provider and ensure that all those has been covered. And of course, the second one, infrastructure system security, making sure that your internal IT system is protected against any of the cyber breach or cyber incident. So these are just two of the data protection best practices, and I'm going to share with you the next one, in which is by cybersecurity agency. It's called the Cybersecurity Essential, and they actually focus on a few key areas, mainly to provide guidelines on how you can protect your information assets, how you can secure your system, ensuring you got proper antivirus, how do you ensure your system is updated so that unauthorized people will not be able to leverage on the vulnerabilities, backup, and making sure that for your backup itself, you've got proper recovery in place. And of course, when there's an incident, how do you ensure it's being recovered? So all those things are very, very basic. And over my 20 years of experiences on the ground, we are still seeing a lot of companies, charities, non-profit organizations are not even getting this basic right. So moving on, I would like to share some IT management best practices. IT management, again, because of a lack of skilled personnel, is always important to make sure that you get a proper service provider in to help you. And a lot of our charities or SME or even non-profit organizations, they are moving to the cloud. And again, how do we ensure the cloud security? How do we ensure the data is backed up properly? And how do we ensure their recovery SOP? So these are one of the key things in which we always like to advocate on the ground for the charities or even a lot of our non-profit organization client to get the act in place. And second, always make sure that our staff is trained. Nothing matters more than a trained staff. Okay, and I always like to share, it just take one person to click on the link and he or she will be able to share the account login information. They'll be able to share a lot of internal information to unauthorized personnel. And of course, lastly, it's very, very important, okay, that your service provider is able to take care of all your IT needs. I have audited one client. It's actually a charity, and they also SSA, a social service agency. And they actually outsource the whole IT service management to a service provider. And as an auditor, when I went in to audit them, I asked the service provider, can you share with me how do you protect, okay, how do you protect your administrator account? And what are the IT system that you protect and you administer? And the service provider just sent me the whole Excel spreadsheet. And in the Excel spreadsheet, it actually lists out all the server's name and the password to access to the server. Okay. And when I look at this, I was almost stunned. I said, oh, okay, thank you. Thank you for giving me, such an easy point to write. And straight away, I list it as a high-level issues. And I quickly went down with the client and sort out the issues. Okay. And I told them at least encrypt the Excel spreadsheet. At least that's the minimum. So on the operational level, we found that a lot of the service provider, they are very good at managing operations. But in terms of the security wise, there's still some gaps in between. So moving on to the next few other consideration, there are supports for charities. And what we have actually seen in the NCSS website, if you're actually an SSA, a social service agency, there are funding provided for you to benchmark your operation against the cybersecurity essential, trust mark, or even the data protection essential and the data protection trust mark. And all these things, I think the key consideration is to ensure, that our charities are able to meet a particular security. They are able to have a basic security requirement so that they are able to protect their internal information or even the system from any unauthorized attack. So moving on, if we see the last thoughts that I have for the charities itself, I'd like to just reiterate this slide. Every year I will go to the CSA website, the Cybersecurity Agency website, and every year I will leverage on this slide to see the number of cyber attacks to the organization or to Singapore. And one of the key things that I have actually seen are the phishing attack, 55,000. And I believe that there's always that number is underrated because a lot of organizations, they do not report when there's a phishing attack. And if you look at website defacement is 419, ransomware 137. But those are not my major concern. My major concern, if you look at the center portion, the cybercrime in Singapore is 48%. And I hope that the charities itself, especially donation through the platform, does not contribute any increase to the percentage for the next following few years. So hopefully I'm able to bring forward some experiences to the ground. And of course, there definitely security or cybersecurity data protection is what we always call evergreen. We cannot stop there. And most important thing is when we are moving, especially to the technology platform, or we are going into the digitalization, always do a risk assessment, always do a data protection impact assessment, so that we can identify all the risks and reduce any impact to the organization. So with that, I think thank you, and I'll pass it back to Serene.
Thank you, Wai Khin. That was very informative and very comprehensive. Our next segment is our panel discussion, consisting of Samuel, Wai Khin, and Ms. Aarthi Sankar. By way of introduction, Aarthi Sankar serves as the Executive Director of the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals in Singapore. With over 10 years of experience in the social services and public sector, Aarthi is committed to bridging the gap between communities to promote the greater good and believes that everyone has a role to play in creating a more compassionate society. Welcome. Thank you, Aarthi, Wai Khin, and Samuel for joining us today. I pause here to remind attendees that if you have any questions, please submit them through the pigeonhole. So let's approach our first case scenario. Tom started animal charity and relied on his own money and his family and friends for donations. As animal charity grew, Tom realized that he needs to find other sources of funding. Tom publicized on social media that animal charity needs money and provides his personal bank account number. Lucy reshared Tom's post and puts her bank account number and claims that she will help to collect and pass over any money that she raised to animal charity. Samuel, from a legal perspective, are there any issues with this?
I see so many issues. Where do we start? Firstly, Tom, by starting a charity and by raising his own funds, is probably engaging in activity that currently requires regulation as well, right? And I think Wai Khin and I talked about this before previously, and I think probably he should not be sharing his personal details this way. But of course, I'll let Wai Khin share more about that. I think he will be engaging in online appeals, and of course, he'll be deemed to be doing something that requires online. So it will be regulated as well. So I think this is probably something that we have to take note that even if he is raising charities this way, there's no way the donors can actually verify what he's doing as well. So there's so many things, I really don't know where to start. But looking at this, I would strongly dissuade him from doing this because of all the danger that he's exposing himself to. Perhaps a better way is really to use one of the online portals that are already available, which of course you guys might already know that the MCCY has a code of practice for online charitable fundraising appeals that has already been implemented and is in place already. So Tom should really be looking at using platforms which have already subscribed to and are compliant with this code of practice, right? For example, giving.sg, I think, Ray of Hope, and many others, right? A few others, yeah, such as a Give Asia. So that should have been his first approach. Go and find out more about all these platforms, talk to the people running the platform and using the platforms instead, rather than exposing his own bank account number. Yeah. And Lucy, is kind of like, just following, she should not have done so. And there are some risk factors involved here between Tom sharing and Lucy resharing and putting her own bank account as well. As a donor, personally, I would be very concerned because I don't know these people next to Adam. I don't know if the money will eventually go to the animal charity, and there is no accountability and no transparency. So as a donor, in fact, personally, I would be very put off and I'll be worried about how they are running the charity. Certainly for me, in my perspective, it would be very helpful if Tom had actually straightway gone to one of these platforms instead. Lucy, for all of her good-heartedness, right, just exacerbated the problem by resharing and adding on her own personal bank account, right? So she's exposing herself to quite a fair bit of risk as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Emerald. So I think in short, bad idea.
A really bad idea.
Really bad idea. But let's hear from the cybersecurity risk aspect. Wai Khin, what are your thoughts about this situation?
Okay, I'm Lucy. Yeah, I'm Lucy. I reshare Tom's post. How do you validate that I'm Lucy? So I think that is a key thing, especially for all those social media. I can easily fake one, and I can actually use Tom post or whatever post, to send around. And just now in one of my presentation, I have also shared my QR code, and please donate to me. And there's no liabilities, and I'm going to send it to the animal charities. Okay, so the animal charity is actually my son. So I'm going to use the money for them. But again, all this information we do not know. And what Samuel has mentioned, the accountability, where does the money goes by? And of course, now with PDPC itself, at a personal level, we should not share too much of our personal information online. And by sharing more information, people will be able to leverage on all this information and maybe use it as a trust factor, and try to scam other people. So that's why I say, who is Lucy? I am Lucy. I can be Nancy. I can be Jesslyn. I can be anybody. As long as we are able to use some kind of sympathy, I can paint a picture, a sympathy, and trying to scam other people using Tom's name. And ultimately, I think Tom's reputation will be at risk. He's trying to do a good thing, but all these things, because of the scam, because of the negative publicity, ultimately, it might actually impact his collection. So yeah, Serene, it's not a good idea to actually do that. If you want, donate to me. Yeah, I'll send it to SPCA in which Aarthi is next now. Yeah.
Thanks, Wai Khin. And I think it is important, and I thought what was interesting from your sharing is that it's not only just about cybersecurity of the charity, but also of yourself. Tom is putting himself at risk by sharing his own personal bank account details and his name. Aarthi, so what has SPCA's experience been in trying to raise money online?
First of all, I want to just say it's great that Tom wants to, go beyond his family and his friends, because animal charities require a lot of money. But I just wanted to just comment about this. I think as charity leaders, whether you're the head of the fundraising, head of finance, or the executive director or the founder, you actually are obligated to your donors. Whether it is transparency, whether it's also longevity of your charity. You can raise maybe $5,000, by putting people's bank account number. The next time you need to raise this money, and as we know, we all want our charities to grow year to year, strength to strength. There will come a point in time when your donors will start asking you, hey, I actually donated $5,000. Where did that money go to? So the important thing here is that try your best not to, to keep those lines very, very clear, especially as the founder of the charity. He's also opening himself up to criticism later that, oh, you actually were collecting this with your personal bank account number. Whether or not he genuinely donated it back to the animal charity is something secondary, but you open yourself up to that kind of criticism. So for the SPCA in general, we have also come across, cases like Lucy, who are quite persistent that, they want to actually donate by getting all of their friends together. Sometimes maybe it's just a communal feeling and they feel that there's an impact when they go give in a much larger amount. And we're very grateful for people like this. But what I would do first is make sure I know Lucy. I've done some background screening of Lucy as well. I've met her, I understand why she's keen to support us. And the second is to have some sort of an agreement with this person, which is that for every person who has donated through Lucy, then you get a list of their names, you get a list of their addresses, and you give them an acknowledgement letter from the charity. Then the charity themselves can go out and say that if you did not receive an acknowledgement from us, whether it's an automated one, whether it's a letter, then you know for a fact that this money did not come to us. At the end of the day, we cannot look at fundraising as separate from the rest of our operations. And number two, it is every single person's responsibility to safeguard the name and the reputation of your charity while you're fundraising.
Thanks, Aarthi. I think that's so pertinent because I think nowadays there's a greater public awareness and consciousness, and I've seen or observed on my end a lot more people who request, instead of giving me a gift for my birthday or even for a wedding, could you please donate to a particular cause? So sometimes they try to do that. So it's quite useful to hear from the charity's perspective that, there's some considerations that potential donors have to keep in mind. Now we have a question from the audience member about online fundraising, which is, do you need to issue a receipt for online fundraising or only if requested by the particular donor? I guess especially for your donation platforms. Any thoughts on that, Samuel, first?
Well, it's always good to have a paper trail. I think it is useful for the organization. It is useful for the individual that has donated as well. But administratively, it can be a bit cumbersome these days because we're all gone digital, right? So perhaps the middle ground could be somewhere in the literal middle where you issue receipts, but they are digital receipts, right? What do you think?
Oh, yeah. So what we have actually seen, especially for charities, a lot of the information are already online. The name, the NRIC, for the tax rebate. There's also audit trails. And some of them, they also do issue e-receipts, so I have to save paper. But again, I also understand is that some of those charity platforms, they actually link direct, meaning that they will, after you donate $5,000, you are eligible for tax rebate. And the charities will actually use this information and send it to IRAS with the NIC, with the number that you donate, and they actually validated. And they're actually a tax deduction from them. So nowadays, the platform, they have all the information in there. So no need physical copy anymore to prove that you have actually donated.
I think for a lot of charities also, investing in a donor management system, SPC is still quite early, I must admit, into this particular area of technology. But investing in a donor management system then means that whoever's helping you to fundraise can focus on the value-added work of engaging your donors. Receiving a receipt, especially when people have put aside money, whether it's $5 or $100, is an acknowledgement from the charity's perspective. So the SPCA, what we do is that we actually have certain categories and levels. So if you donate within a certain bracket of amount, you get an automated receipt. For people who donate at a higher level, we usually will send in a personal, it's of course a digital letter, but it's something that is sent to them so that they know that, hey, I've been acknowledged and you actually know who I am. I think it's important to know your donors, regardless of, how small the amounts are. This is how we actually realize that some of our youngest donors are our biggest donors. So when we use platforms like giving.sg, you're actually encouraging a lot of organic giving. And it's great because you can see who's helping you to fundraise and their friends are then collectively involved in that case. And particularly for us, we've had 9-year-olds, 11-year-olds choose not to have a birthday party instead and give to the animals. And they raise quite substantial amounts over the years and it becomes a practice for them. So it's not just about how much they're bringing in, but also building that next line of donors. You start them at 9 years old and 10 years old, they become big supporters of your charity over the years and they build that affinity with you as well.
Thanks. Such important takeaways. I think Wai Khin totally forgot the point about the very important tax deduction, especially for the corporate donors. So receipt is important besides accountability. And for Aarthi, yes, it's such an interesting method of donor appreciation by having, as you said, if you donate a certain amount, perhaps the charity might have, as you said, a more personalized thank you or acknowledgement for that. So let's go to the next part of the scenario. Tom has limited funds and volunteers, which I think most charities can sympathize with. And he's wondering what is the most effective way of raising funds. He would like to look into a digital fundraising policy and coming up with a fundraising policy. So it sounds here that Tom has some foresight. He's trying to be maybe more systematic, a bit more structured about how he wants to go about raising funds. So perhaps, I think first we'll start with Aarthi in terms of or the different ways in which charities can raise money.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people who are participating here probably have the same or even better ideas than we do. There are definitely events that we run ourselves, for example, gala dinners, physical events where we encourage people to come forward. And then you've got donor engagement where you reach out to your patrons or your largest supporters as well. And then you have the organic giving, which is always the most refreshing way because you meet new people, you expand your network of supporters as well. For us specifically, and I will keep advocating for Giving.sg and other platforms like Give.asia because they really did help us during COVID period. I'm sure a lot of other charity leaders felt the same way. But more than that is that you could understand how someone could build a story for your charity. So as I mentioned, we had an 11-year-old girl, her name is Sasha, and she actually came down to the SPCA and she could take videos of the staff, she did interviews, and then she used that as her fundraising appeal to members of the public. And she was very, very successful in the way she reached out to people because it was very heartwarming for people to hear a young girl speaking up for a charity that she believed in. So I feel like there are very creative ways we can do it. It also depends on what kind of resources each charity has. For many of us, fundraising is a one-man department, but for some of us, we are lucky we have, some resources towards third-party fundraisers. Whichever it is, I think that policy, the SOP is very important. What risk are you open to? So about 2 years ago, our website was actually hacked, and it was not malicious. There was no loss of data. It was a very harrowing experience for the SPCA because, we had to go through an entire remediation plan, but it was also a very good wake-up call for us, to start looking at every single element. Technology, digitization is not just about how good your technology is or how fast your internet runs. It is really about looking at controls. It's looking at accountability, basically. Whether is it simple things like your air conditioning or whether it's like much larger things like your server data. And I think that once we were able to strengthen this, and it's a process, I will be very honest, we have not, hit the gold standard by any means. I'm sure if he comes down now, he will probably be like, no, Aarthi, you're being a Lucy now, but I think more importantly, it's that we are committed to it. And the more you speak about it, the more you discuss it, the more resources you can invest. And the resources need not be just a staff or a IT company. These are great to have, but it's also knowledge. It's also about looking at policies, bringing everybody together to discuss that. Same for fundraising. Once you decide that digital fundraising, which I feel that most of us are already involved in, you cannot run away from it because most of your younger audience, your future donors are all online. If you don't engage them there, then it's going to be really, really hard because at some point, street collections are not going to be the only way you can reach out to people.
Thanks, Aarthi. I think, Wai Khin, during your presentation earlier, you mentioned about one of the challenges is lack of awareness, especially among employees. And I'm so mindful that for charities, sometimes they rely so much on volunteers, and it's kind of a revolving door because, volunteers, they do have their day jobs, etc. So talking about, fundraising policies or digital protection policies, do you have any tips in terms of what charities should consider?
Yep. So what I have actually seen from some of my clients, when there's a new volunteer on board, they make sure that, they actually read through. They also go through a training, especially on the do and don'ts. It's not long. You need to go through 1-2 hours, so boring, but rather the most common issues, what are maybe the top 3 considerations? For example, when they are dealing with confidential information, how do they ensure, is authorized, is appropriate? When they're handling personal information, how do they ensure, it does not share unauthorized? And of course, if there's anything they suspect that there's any abnormal activities, how do they flag up to the data protection officer in a timely manner to make sure that, investigation can be done? So some simple awareness that what my client has done is that they base the training materials to their daily life. Another example is that they say that you're using your phone to access the email. So when you're using your phone to access the email sent by the charities, making sure that it's properly protected. And if you actually receive any personal information through the email, and if it's not authorized, make sure that you report, because sometimes we can send things wrongly. So these are some of the common things in which we have seen for volunteers to make sure that they are being aware Day jobs, everybody's busy. Some of them might not come into this space. So night job, they volunteer out of their personal time. And some of my clients, they use the daily life scenario and match it to what they're actually doing so that it can actually relate to them. So this is one of the things that I've seen is actually quite effective.
Thanks for that. A question from an audience member, and perhaps I'll direct that to Samuel. For large donations, charities are encouraged to do donor background research in consideration of money laundering. So that's another relevant factor as well, your anti-money laundering regulations. So how does this expectation of know your client or customer, fit with online giving portals?
I think if monies are coming into the charity, often it flows out only according to the charity's purposes. So if you talk about money laundering through a charity that is registered with NCSS, I think it's quite difficult, not impossible, but difficult. Of course, you want to know who your donors are, so that at some point you can build up a meaningful understanding of your demographics, of who you're reaching out to, and how your donors are gifting to you. So I think that there is always a role for KYC in anything that we do, so long as it involves money. I always take the view that you should conduct a fair amount of KYC. Not every case is the same. And of course, if the donation is made to you and given to you, given to the charity so that the charity can exercise its own purposes, then I think the risks are much lower. If the charities come to you and the donor say, oh, but you must then do this for me, then probably that's when knowing more about this client will be useful. You do not want to inadvertently get mixed up in other people's business, So it really depends, therefore, on the situation, and what kind of contingencies or what kind of conditions have been imposed on you for in exchange for the funds.
I could just add to that. So I was reading the exact same regime. There was recently some guidelines sent to us about how we can actually ensure that we do not in some way support these money laundering or terrorist efforts as well. And I think that at the end of the day, somebody in our departments or someone has to be looking at the incoming money that's coming in, and we should be able to identify. So there were certain guidelines given to us. One is if you see a lot of small transactions that are adding up to something coming from the same place, so then those are the red flags that either your head of finance or your fundraising manager or someone who's looking at the inflow or even the founder is looking at, right? To me as a charity, we're always looking at how much money is coming into us. It's very important because it determines how many more years we can be sustained for. And number two is really, yes, pick up that phone and call that person, do some research when you see those kind of numbers coming in that you are not familiar with, or businesses or names that you're not familiar with. But if you're looking at very large quantity of donations, you're a very lucky charity. But more importantly, I think that, in that whole advisory is also that our job is to report as quickly as we know. We may not be able to be the immediate sort of catch-all for every situation, but once we know, there's a responsibility for us to report it to the correct authorities as well. So the way I understand it is that you are not implicated just because you were the recipient, because a lot of times you cannot determine who can give you the money, right? But if you already have verified it and you do not identify it quickly enough, or you're not able to escalate it to the right place, knowing the information, that is a bit more challenging.
Serene, can I ask a question about this? I think interesting to talk about anti-money laundering.
Yes.
So maybe this is nothing to do. It's something pop out of my mind. I like to what I want to find out is, and what Aarthi has actually mentioned and what Samuel has mentioned. So I'm Lucy. Okay, I'm Lucy again. Yes. And I hack into people's account. I scam people's money. Okay, $1 million, for example. I'm a very good hacker. I'm a very good scammer. But my heart is actually to the charities.
Yep.
And I filter the money, to SPCA. So how in terms of the money recipient, because ultimately you can't trace who am I. Because I hack someone's account, I go through one account, I transfer the money and it went to SPCA. So how does, the charities or even the law side of things deal with that? I know it hasn't happened, but
Sure.
because there are some activists out there that do things for a cause. So maybe I'm just starting to think of this whereby suddenly money comes in, through the illegitimate source, and maybe on the law or charities, how you all.
Sure, maybe for me to just frame it a little bit. What happened if you're a modern day Robin Hood, right? Who basically clearly stole the money from a third party, and then of course donated it to a specific charity. Then obviously perhaps the police traced it and managed to find the charity and said, hey charity, so sorry, what you receive is illegal proceeds, can you please return it to me? So maybe first I ask Samuel, from a legal perspective, is the charity obliged to return it?
Two wrongs never make a right. I think in this case, right, if the money is ill-gotten, then clearly the charity shouldn't hold on to it, especially if the police has come knocking and say, well, we know it's not your fault, but someone put some ill-gotten gains into your account. So I think it's better to comply. Of course, we all need money. Every charity has a need for money, but it's better to stand by the principles, that keeps our society functioning, So if we give in to this kind of Robin Hood behavior, right, I don't know where we stop, I don't know how deep the rabbit hole is if we were to do this. So yes,
I feel that some donations are more expensive than others. As a charity, we understand this. There are some donors that you need to engage longer. You need to spend a lot more time explaining things to them. Similarly, some donations may just not be worth what it's going to cost you in the long run for two reasons. One, not getting into trouble with the law. Number two is not getting into trouble with your other donors. So when you support any of these activities, what if someone feels very against those same things, those same principles, right? We're very clear when it's against our principle. For us, if this is something to do with animal abuse or any sort of company that's associated with that kind of work, of course we will reject it. But when it comes to other criminal activity is quite straightforward. I think questionable activities is where the line can be quite thin. But I would always like to think, when I send out the report at the end of the year, what will my other donors think? When they look at my financial house, when they look at my donations that came in, when they hear news, because news spreads very, very fast when you're a charity, especially, and scams are like, the buzzword these days, right? What would another donor do? Would they now think twice, donate to me? Or would they actually feel that, hey, you did your due diligence and I want to continue supporting you, and I rather you err with caution? So those are important questions to ask.
Thanks, Aarthi. It's so important to think about, beyond money, charities very often stand for a particular principle or cause. So, even though you may feel a particular action may not impact much on the charity, but a lot of, as you said, reputation is so important. And if the donors feel that what that charity is doing doesn't quite sit comfortably with them, they may find other charities to donate to.
Serene, I want to pick up on what Aarthi said about the gray side of things.
Yes.
So maybe an example would be this. A matriarch passes on and leaves the entire brood out of the will, and say that I want half the money to go to my Chihuahua, Chichi, and the other made up name, of course, all the names have been altered. Right?
Obviously, yes.
Yeah, obviously. And the other half to go to SPCA, right? So the family, of course, is livid, that the dog actually got more than.
It's actually happened to us.
Well, of course, art imitates life. So, in that kind of situation, right, of course, the family will get together, get a lawyer, ask the lawyer to demand for the will to be revoked, or maybe to treat the will as invalid, right, for some under some cause or reasons. So in that kind of situation, right, the charity will be under some pressure, right? Or do we return the money or do we not? And this, I feel, is perhaps one of the gray areas that most charities may at some point encounter. My take on it is really, if the will is valid and is properly constituted, the gift is legit, right? And if it's legit, you must acquit, right? You can take it, right? Fortunately or unfortunately, when you have gray areas like family disagreeing with the will, it will introduce an element of uncertainty. But if you go according to the law set out in this case, I think the answer is clear. It may not please everyone, but at least what you have done is lawful. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think we have had a similar case actually. But it was quite clear because it was CPF money that we were talking about. And in this case, we still made that effort to engage the family because we wanted to understand also what were the challenges and difficulties. We were prepared that if the law now says that we need to return this money, we will respectfully return it. But like I said, I will always think, what do my other donors think? If a donor now feels that, hey, even if I put it in the will, SPCA is not going to respect the wishes of the people who have passed, they're just going to listen to the rest of my family. Am I now giving a lot of insecurities to my existing donors who feel that I would like my wealth to go to good causes after I'm there? So that to me is a more important perspective. But long story short, CPF did say that it was a valid will. The money did actually rightfully come to SPCA. And later on, when we spoke to the family, we actually realized that she did have fond memories of SPCA. It's not that it was just completely off nowhere. She has some engagement with us in her childhood that led to this as well. So sometimes you have to do a little bit more effort, because otherwise, if this was a family suffering from financial challenges after the death of somebody in the family, and then the charity takes it away, there's also an optics issue, that, you're taking away money from someone who has nothing now. So that always has to be that balance. And I guess that's where the charity leaders come in, and you have to make that assessment with your board and really have the conversation. My board and I, we discussed that at length for us to determine what will be the best move forward. Yeah.
Thank you, Aarthi. Moving on to the next scenario, which I think is quite a hot topic, given especially the rise of social media. Tom would like to share a story of how animal charity helped Mary's sick dog to attract donations. He cannot get hold of Mary, but thinks it is okay to publicize the story as the focus is on Mary's dog. So Samuel, any thoughts about this?
Yes, I think when you want to share something that is personal, that is not your own personal story to share, it is very important for you to seek permission. In this case, right, Tom, in his animal charity, may have actually helped Mary's sick dog, right? But in the course of attracting donations and actually receiving donations, I am very sure that he may not have asked whether it would be all right to share this story as whether it is as inspiration or to just draw attention to animal charity. Especially since if he cannot get hold of Mary, I think it is better not to do so. That being said, if you look at the PDPA, there's one keyword that I encourage everyone to look at, and that is consent. If you have consent, whether express or deemed, or then you are fine, right? Or if you do something that is actually in the interest of the person that you are disclosing the data of, then of course that should be workable as well. But it is a very slippery slope, and it is very subject to the factual matrix as well. So in this case, if he cannot get hold of Mary, my suggestion to him would be to anonymize, maybe change Mary's name to Lucy, and change the dog's name, maybe change the identifiers that would help, that would actually result in Mary being identified, right? Publish the story, but maybe as an anonymous story. Yeah, of course, that doesn't really give you the kick that you are looking for, right? Because you want something that can be identifiable and personal. So in that case, it really stands to reason for Tom to seek the express consent so that he is not disclosing Mary's personal data without permission.
Yeah, I suppose, in this case, it's Mary's dog. So if this was Mary's child, you feel very, very differently, because the amount of consent, if you're now to say that this child actually benefited from the treatment, how comfortable would we be to now reveal this story? I think number one is having a policy, right? I think SOPs are so important. If your communications policy was such that each time we help the beneficiary, we also ask them for the consent about sharing the story. Number two is to not withhold support just because they didn't give you consent to share their story, because then your intentions also become very questionable. So what is more important is that, hey, there will always be good stories to tell if we look deeper. And like what Samuel just shared is that you can find ways to still tell a powerful story without having to reveal the exact person, or a gruesome photo, or a very heart-wrenching photo need not be that particular case. And if you feel that it really matters, then spend the time with Mary, and explain to her how more people like her could get the help that they require if she was willing to come forward to tell her story. Sometimes they might feel that it's a bit embarrassing to, come forward and say that I needed help.
Yeah.
And our job as charities is to understand that we are trying to make help more accessible to people. We're trying to make sure that people don't feel embarrassed to ask for the help. So how can we now become the perpetrator in that similar situation?
Yeah, just to pick up on the point, Aarthi, actually, right, if you are tying your the need for consent to the provision of services, right, that is actually disallowed under our current PDPA regime. Yeah, so just to highlight, you're right, you can't do that as well. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much. We have come to the Q&A segment. As a reminder to our participants, you can still submit your questions through Pigeonhole. So I'll group some of the questions together, and I think the first topic I'd like to talk about is professional fundraisers. So the first question, and I think this is for Samuel, you mentioned about the 30-70 ratio. So for the 30% cost, of course, besides engaging a professional fundraiser, you also might have a full-time staff on the charity that does full-time fundraising. So does that 30% include your full-time staff?
This is actually a very perennial and interesting issue. I will strongly encourage that you speak with your auditors and your accountants to determine how these numbers are being captured. Yeah.
Thank you, Samuel. Another question about the professional fundraisers. I guess behind the scenes, for professional fundraisers, they do sometimes receive a commission. What are the thinking around? Should we have an open disclosure that if there is professional fundraisers being engaged, that you openly disclose to the public, or a disclaimer that the monies that the public donates through such fundraisers, maybe 10% of it will go to a commission for the fundraiser. Samuel, any thoughts?
I think accountability and transparency is very, very important. When you deal with fundraisers, of course, you've got to make sure that the fundraisers are also clear about how they are back charging you, so that there are no hidden costs. Right, for this, do always consider putting it in writing, and I think when you have a written agreement, it is easier to scrutinize and understand what obligations you are subject to, and what kind of payment is expected by the fundraiser as well. So please don't just go on a handshake and scribble stuff on the back of a serviette and treat it as a contract. Have it looked at professionally, or at the very least by your stakeholders in the office. Make sure that it's something that you are familiar with, or something that you have done before and you are comfortable with, carrying out. Yeah, but of course, if the Panadol doesn't cure the headache, go see a doctor. In this case, if none of your stakeholders are comfortable commenting on the agreement, go see a lawyer. The lawyer will be more than happy to draft up the agreement for you.
Thanks, Samuel. Aarthi, I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts towards disclosure about the cost that goes towards fundraising? Do you find it a very awkward conversation to be telling maybe the donors that I wish that 100% of your proceeds actually goes entirely to our beneficiaries, but the reality is a certain proportion will actually go towards the cost of raising funds?
Yeah, I think this is a challenge that every charity faces, and painfully we do too. As the donation landscape in Singapore has evolved, so has the kind of questions that our donors ask us. We have very specific questions from donors. For example, I would like my money to go specifically for this one drug that you can have in your clinic,
Mm.
or I do not want my money to go towards stuff. What I find that's important is very honest with your donors what you can do and what you cannot do also. And and usually these are the cases of larger donations that we're talking about. We're not talking about just a $5 the flat day. They're not going to tell you that, hey, I don't want this money to go to your staff. No, but it's usually the people who are giving you in a much larger volume. And I think it's about sitting them down and explaining to them. So I've had donors tell me that I want the money to go 100% to the animals. And I'm like, hey, what does 100% to the animals mean? Because we need to hire staff to feed the animals. The animals cannot feed themselves. The animals actually require somebody to train them. The animals require these things. So these are all operating expenses that come into it. How do you feel about that? So we try to find a midpoint. And if my donor is genuinely not comfortable with the money going there, I would also respect that. I think it's important to disclose. How you disclose, of course, is down to the charity itself. To me, I would not really know if I'm 100% comfortable to tell for every single thing that I run that, hey, 5% of this actually went to this. I spent 10% on the food and I spent 20% on this. Rather than that, I rather look at whole figures, number one. And number two is to message it right. That these went towards helping us build other programs, other initiatives that we needed, or this had to be done to operationalize certain things. Most of our donors also run their own events, or they run their own programs, or are part of a company. They know that we need to pay people to make certain things happen. So I have faith that people will evolve, but when you have very conservative donors, respect their boundaries as well. Find ways that you can use the money specifically for those purposes that they request for it.
I think ultimately this idea of transparency and accountability, right, has to be reasonable. And thanks for bringing that up, because I think some things must be said about it. You cannot, of course, determine that the expenses must be towards Lucy's salary, for example, right? It has to go beyond that, right? Or rather step back from that. If the charity has an audit report that is signed off by a properly certified or audit firm, why not, right? I think that should be good enough. And there's no need to accede to that kind of request where they say, oh, you must tell me exactly which staff is paid by my money, right? Because honestly, if you want to give to the charity, give with a giving heart, because that actually adds more work and ironically requires the charity to hire more people to generate the data, right? Yeah.
And I think for us, we also practice a holistic 70-30 ratio. I do know that what we try to do for every single event, we still try to ensure it meets a 70-30, but it's more important to look at the big picture as you run more fundraising events. Because if you are tipping that 30%, then there's something you need to reevaluate about the kind of programs you're running. Are they really bringing in the kind of funds? The 70-30 is not meant to be a rule that sort of bogs us down. It's supposed to guide us to make sure that we are really focusing on the mission. We are focusing on fundraising for what we require. So you can throw a very expensive gala dinner, but if you're not raising enough, then maybe gala dinners is not the way your charity should be raising funds. So these are evaluative decisions that the board, the executive director need to sit down and then look at what we've done. So each event do that 70-30, but remember it's the bigger picture that you are really committed to. And then at the end of the year, drop some events if you feel that they're not working out for you. If you feel that certain things brought in the money, invest more in those areas.
I think a very good reminder to be more cost efficient about the choice of activities or events that you use to raise funds. Wai Khin, a question for you. This is about checking QR code security. So when it comes to, I think, visiting fake websites, it's very easy for any layman to check. You just check the alphabets, whether it makes sense or whether there's consistency. But when it comes to QR codes, it's just a picture. So how can anyone check whether it's accurate or not accurate?
Simple. Just scan. Scan and click and check. Because usually what happened was that nowadays, from what I have seen, if you just scan the QR code, you just bring you to a website. And that's where you just do your due diligence and validate, making sure that there's a proper website, making sure that the information there is actually accurate. Again, most of the phishing scam I have seen is mainly to scam for your user ID and password, maybe your bank account details, and of course, forward in things like OTP. This thing one thing lead to another. So just be careful. There's no difference between a QR code and a normal link that you click. It's actually the same. It's just that make sure that what we are being trained for, just identify, making sure that the website is secure, the website is accurate, the website is genuine. And when you actually provide payment, make sure that you double check. Because again, when, for example, Pay Now, okay? So when we do Pay Now, it's through DBS bank or through any bank, you can actually validate that who is the recipient. Let's say, for example, SPCA, I want to pay now to SPCA. So it's very clear that it's actually SPCA. And it's not SPCX, the at sign. So we can actually, all those we have been trained, we know. So all those things are quite standard. So as long as we maintain the skill set, do verification, double check, and not nowadays, I mean, youngsters, they are very fast. And the attention span is very short. When they see, as long as they felt that it is, they click. So just spend another few additional minutes, verify the website. Even if you are being scammed by the website, before you pay, double check on the recipient. I think that will actually help. There's nothing sophisticated about QR code. I can easily create one QR code. I can create a lot of QR code, but it might not lead to the authorized recipient. And as long as we are vigilant, I think that one should be okay.
Thanks for that. Another question is, how do we mitigate the risks of fraudsters setting up similar but false fundraising campaigns online? Any thoughts about it? I mean, maybe I'm not sure about Wai Khin. Is there a way to do constant searches to check is there similar or false websites out there?
The answer is no. It's very difficult. Just like I can go out and masquerade as Samuel because we look almost alike. We wear specs, we look almost alike. So I wear a jacket. I'm no more Lucy, I'm Samuel. I can have a Samuel's name card. I can go to, I create a fake Samuel's website, and I can go to SPCA, hey, I'm Samuel. I'm here to help you. But again, how does Samuel detect? He can't. The only way that he can detect is Aarthi call Samuel. Hey, Sam, you visited me yesterday. Then Samuel say, hey, no, I didn't. This is where the truth is out. So I have done a lot of investigation previously in my previous job. It's an e-commerce platform. And what happened is that the attacker, they are just trying to copy your whole website, said it is a fake one, and using that and send it out to all those customers, hoping that they can actually click in and fish for their user ID and password. And of course, there are some controls out there. So the control is that usually how the attacker works is that after you enter your user ID and password, you redirect back to the main site, the actual site, to bluff the users that you enter the wrong password. Okay, so this is where one of the mechanisms we can use IT to detect. But again, you need monitoring mechanism to check, where the website comes back, from which link, what are the information being passed to, what are the information being received. If not, it's actually very, very difficult. And what I have seen, some of my clients, when they actually call me, they say that the donor actually make a complaint to them. And then they do not know what to do. And then they contacted me. And I give them the same advice. There's nothing we can do. The only thing is that we can find out the fake website, quickly report to the authorities, quickly report to the internet service provider, all those telco service provider, so that they can actually remove them. And in our browser, the Edge, Chrome, or even Firefox, there's actually a link to report fraudulent website. So if you manage to detect at your own, you can actually send all this link through the browser, to all those service provider, whereby they will validate, and if they detect that it's a fraudulent website, you block it at their level. If not, the rest is just awareness. And I believe even similar, if you look at a lot of the banks website nowadays, they always have the disclosure. If you suspect that this is not the real website, or you visit some scam website, please inform them, and then they'll take the appropriate action accordingly. So what's outside our control is very, very difficult.
All right, thank you so much for that. Now, another point that you brought up during your presentation was about the importance of choosing the right service provider, or sometimes charities are too reliant on service providers to have their own security measures. So for this particular audience member, he asked, look, let's say if worse comes to worse, there is a cybersecurity breach, noted that the charity does have some responsibility, but can the charity go and sue the service provider? Perhaps Samuel?
The devil is in the details, right? So you will have to see the terms of use that has been that you have actually agreed to. In most cases, right, you'll find that online platforms do tend to disclaim liability or exclude liability for certain things. And I feel that it's incumbent on you to read and to understand what are the terms that the service provider has agreed to as well, right? So you can't just assume that they will be responsible or they have agreed to certain standard kind of terms and conditions. Always read, always check. If you have difficulty understanding the legalese, always ask for help.
Maybe Serene, let me just add in one point to what Samuel has mentioned. It's very important. So as an auditor, we always validate the outsourcing arrangement. And we always check if there's a lapse or if there's actually a issues coming from the service provider whose liability. And many a times we did not see that if it's I think there's a technical terms. Let me move about name man, right? If it's the responsibility of the service provider that didn't do a proper job, the liability should be from them. But many a time we did not put this in. They only put in service level, meaning that if there's an IT issue, what time that they need to respond, how many computers that they need to maintain, and also what is the support hours. So they don't talk about liabilities, indemnity. And there was one particular case whereby we went in, we audited the client. We found that the service provider for the past 10 years has been taking it's a NPO, non-profit organization, for a ride. So they're supposed to do patching, supposed to maintain website, but they did not even do that. And they went back to tell the client, every year you pay $10,000 for 100 accounts, but they resell 50 accounts to other people. Okay. So when we actually went in, we checked, there are some fraudulent activities in there. But when we checked the contract, the contract did not say that if the service provider, have some activities, the organization can actually take action against them. So, I mean, legally that can be, but when we look at the contractual wise, they're still fulfilling the SLA. They say that this 50, is actually underused, they actually make it more productive. And then if it's needed, they'll bring it back, etc. and etc. So ultimately, we told them that security, liabilities, responsibilities, all those things must be properly documented. And I think what Samuel has mentioned, get a lawyer to look through, especially, when such things happen, how does the organization protect themselves?
Thank you for that. One possible option to raise funds that's been raised by an audience member is lucky draw or donation draws. Is there any particular factors that the charity should consider before it tries having a lucky draw or donation draw in order to attract donations? Perhaps Samuel?
Yeah, I think when you talk about lucky draws and any like raffles or raffle draws, you do need to seek permission from the police. There's a licensing unit that takes care of this, and for any such cases, right, you must always firstly make sure that the activities are conducted in compliance with existing laws, that you are clear as to what your obligations are, and of course you must be responsible in how you share your database with these service providers. So always start with a proper contract, have it validated, verified, validated, and checked through to make sure that there's nothing there that would actually compromise your position before you even carry out the activity with this service provider. Yeah, always, of course, when you do things like that, as I mentioned, the police will issue a license, and that license must be procured before the actual commencement of events. Yeah.
Thanks, Samuel. I think that's an important reminder. It's not just the fundraising permit, but you also need an additional permit from the police to have a lucky draw.
Yeah.
Perhaps another question for Samuel, just grouping it together.
Sure.
You mentioned about a fundraising permit. So do you need a fundraising permit for virtual online events?
Fundraising for virtual online events.
Yes.
I guess, what do you think, Aarthi, from your experience?
Are you referring to this new regime? Is it like we're moving towards? I think
yeah.
primarily it's always been for soliciting in public.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's usually where you need to seek those permits. Because online, I mean, for us also, we use crowdsourcing platforms like Giving.sg and our website even to receive the money. But I think it depends on the context of what do they mean by permit. So are you selling something, or are you,
because if you use, like you correctly pointed out, if you use these platforms, they are already verified.
Yes.
Right. And as a charity, you are already able to raise through these platforms. So maybe, perhaps the better question to ask is what kind of permits? Of course, certain types of businesses may attract certain requirements. If, for example, you are doing a wine and dine thing, right? You have to carry it out in a establishment that is already carrying the liquor license. You cannot, of course, serve food if you are not licensed to prepare food. So all these is are things that you probably have to look into at a deeper level, So if a fundraiser comes to you and say, oh, let's do this event at I don't know, do they still call it discos? At a night spot? Yeah. No, sorry, I'm showing my age. You can actually make sure that the establishment is in agreement. You have checked their licenses, like liquor licenses, make sure it's still valid. But of course, these are usually things which have to be done by the service provider.
My sensing is also that donors these days are quite particular about being more prudent about what you spend on them versus what goes to the charity. So even when we run dinners, the feedback has always been, hey, we don't need a fancy dinner. We don't want the best top quality wine. Get a sponsor. We want to have a good time. We want to talk about our love for animals, but then, we don't need you to do something so grand and so massive. So maybe it's also good for us to get sensing from our donors who've attended our events in the past. Good to do some service. We do it for our volunteers. We do it with members of public. Why not ask your donors also, right? Like, why do they choose to give? It need not be a very formal service, because it's a bit weird to, message a very big patron and ask them this, right? But then they're like, should I not be giving to you? But no, more importantly, it's just get on a call with them and say, what compelled you to give? What compels you to keep giving to us? What would you like to see us do differently? How would you like me to engage you? Would you like it if I give you a donor impact report at the end of the year? And some donors have told me that I don't need anything. All I need is at the end of the year, tell me how many families or how many animals my money impacted. And those are the kind of donors you want to cultivate and grow anyway, right? So I think it's important to have a sensing of your donor demographics. If you're building a new demographics, yes, you might need to try a few different things, but after a while, you should understand. And as the donor ages evolve, and if you're going on digital fundraising platforms, you're definitely dealing with younger donors also. I think they're quite sensitive about where their money goes. Yeah.
Thank you, Aarthi. So important to remember to you can also get feedback from your donors as well, besides getting feedback from the beneficiaries, and that will help you better tailor your donation activities and programs. Our time is coming to a close, but before we do so, I would like to invite each of our speakers to leave us with one key takeaway, or one or two if one is a bit too short. All right, so, okay, let me just start from my left. Let me ask Samuel first.
Okay, so the one takeaway is always compliance, right? Because you are operating in an environment where, of course, you're dealing with things which are really sensitive, like money. It is always good to make sure you comply with the rules, whether it is in fundraising, street to street, or whether it is in corporate governance. Make sure that you are in compliance. Yeah, that would be my takeaway.
Thanks, Samuel.
Yeah.
Wai Khin?
Mine will be, I think we can equip, every year we'll do a body checkup, to make sure that our health is proper. Same thing as I think, be it whether is it online, or even just manual process, it's always good, to do a health check on all the processes. As what Sammy has mentioned, on the compliance thing, especially for online when things are moving too fast. technology changes almost every year. Okay, and maybe every year is already too long. It could be every half a year. So regularly, I would recommend do a health check or audit. In what we actually say, audit on the internal process to make sure that things are proper and be compliant. Not only just to the charities requirement, internal process, and also I think I have shared some best practices. Those can be a good benchmark for us.
I think for me, it really boils down to two things. The first is longevity. Remember that fundraising is not just about getting by this year. Good charities that want to continue to thrive, charities that want to keep maximizing their impact for their beneficiaries need to think ahead of time. If you think about longevity, then think about what would other donors think when they realize I accepted this, or if I had done it differently, if I did not invest enough effort and care to making sure I did this process correctly. If longevity is what you're going for, then let's not cut corners with it. The second is obligation. Of all the charities in the world, this donor chose your charity. They resonate with your cause, they understand, they believe that what you're doing is important. We are obliged to these people because they are helping us tide over certain operational costs. They are helping us to help more people as well. So let's treat it as we would, whether it's your own resources, your own savings, or your parents' savings, right? You be very, very careful about who your parents can go and donate their money to, whether they get stuck in a scam. So the same way, let's make sure that we treat these resources, understand it's for a bigger purpose, and they chose you. So in return, we need to make sure that we do our due diligence and we make sure that we stay relevant. At the same time, we are careful and prudent with people's funds.
Thank you for that. And this brings our webinar to an end. After this webinar ends, a feedback form will pop up on your browser for your completion. We appreciate your feedback so that we can improve our future webinars. If your charity needs legal advice, please email us at assistnpos@probono.sg. With regard to the change in the fundraising regime, do keep a lookout for future Q&As. On behalf of Pro Bono SG and the Office of the Commissioner of Charities, we would like to thank our speakers again and thank you for all of you for attending and have a great week ahead.
Thank you.
Bye.